The rain hammered against the tin roof of a house that could barely be called one anymore, and inside, a man knelt beside a mattress on the floor, pressing a damp cloth against his daughter's burning forehead, praying to a God he had stopped believing in years ago. His name was Thomas Ferrow, and by the time this story reaches its end, you will understand why strangers who never knew him still visit his grave and leave flowers. Before we go further, if you believe that kindness always finds its way back, and that second chances are real, take a moment to like this video, drop a comment saying, "Hope and wisdom," share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. It means more than you know. Thomas hadn't always lived in that crumbling house on the edge of Millbrook Township. 10 years earlier, he'd been a foreman at the local textile mill, married to a woman named Rosalind who filled their small home with laughter and the smell of cinnamon bread. Their daughter, Junie, was 6 years old then, all gap-toothed smiles and scraped knees from climbing the oak tree behind their yard. Life wasn't rich, but it was full. Then Rosalind got sick. The kind of sick that drains a family's savings before it drains anything else. Thomas sold his truck, then his tools, then the wedding ring his own father had given him to give to her. None of it mattered in the end. She passed on a gray October morning, and Thomas was left standing in a hospital hallway holding his daughter's small hand, both of them staring at a closed door as if staring hard enough might open it again. The mill closed 2 years later when the company moved operations overseas. Thomas was 43, with a young daughter, no wife, no savings, and no job in a town that had nothing left to offer men like him. He took whatever work he could find. He mended fences for the Whitmores down the road. He hauled lumber for a construction crew when they'd have him, which wasn't often, because his knees had started failing from years of factory labor. Some weeks, the only meal in the house was a pot of watery oatmeal, and Thomas always claimed he'd already eaten before Junie sat down, so there'd be more for her. Junie grew up watching her father's hands grow rougher and his back grow more stooped, but she never once heard him complain. What she remembered most, she would say later, was how he always found a way to smile at her, even on nights when she caught him sitting alone on the porch steps, head in his hands, believing she was asleep. By the time Junie turned 16, she was sharp as a tack, the kind of student teachers wrote letters about. She scored the highest marks in her class 2 years running, and her guidance counselor told her, quietly, that a girl like her belonged at a university, not scraping by in Millbrook. But university meant money, and money was the one thing Thomas Ferrow never had enough of. He started taking night shifts at a warehouse 40 minutes away, on top of whatever day labor he could scrounge. He stopped buying himself new clothes. He stopped seeing the doctor about the pain in his chest that had been creeping in for months, telling himself it was nothing, telling himself he didn't have time to be sick, not now, not when Junie needed every spare dollar for application fees and textbooks. One February night, the pain became too much to ignore. Thomas collapsed at the warehouse loading dock, and a coworker found him barely conscious, his lips tinged blue. The ambulance ride felt like an eternity to the young man riding beside him, a stranger named Desmond who had only worked with Thomas for a few months but had grown to respect the quiet, hard-working man deeply. At the hospital, the diagnosis came fast and merciless. Thomas's heart, weakened by years of stress, poor nutrition, and untreated strain, was failing. The doctors said surgery might buy him time, but there was no guarantee, and the cost was more than he would earn in 5 years of warehouse shifts. When Junie arrived at the hospital, her father tried to manage a smile from the bed, the same tired, loving smile he'd given her 1,000 times before. She sat beside him, gripping his weathered hand, and for the first time in her life, she saw real fear behind his eyes, not for himself, but for what would happen to her if he wasn't there. What Thomas didn't know was that Desmond, the coworker who'd ridden with him in the ambulance, had gone back to the warehouse and told everyone what he'd seen, a man who gave every spare cent to his daughter's future while wearing the same worn boots for 6 years straight. Word spread through Millbrook the way it does in small towns, quietly at first, then like wildfire. The Whitmores, whose fences Thomas had mended for next to nothing, started a collection. Junie's old teachers reached out to former students. A local news reporter picked up the story, and then it wasn't just Millbrook anymore. Within 3 weeks, strangers from across the country had donated enough not only to cover Thomas's surgery but to set aside a fund for Junie's education. Thomas wept when the hospital administrator told him, insisting there had to be a mistake, that he hadn't asked anyone for anything. But that was precisely why people had given. He had never asked. He had only given, quietly, for 16 years, without ever expecting anything back. The surgery succeeded. Thomas Ferrow walked out of that hospital 3 months later, thinner and slower, but alive, with his daughter's arm looped through his the entire way to the car. Junie graduated at the top of her class the following spring, and when she walked across that stage, she scanned the crowd until she found him, standing despite his doctor's orders to rest, clapping harder than anyone in the room, tears streaming freely down a face that had forgotten how to cry from anything but grief until that very moment. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a second to like this video and leave a comment below. Your support helps stories like Thomas and Junie's reach the people who need them most. And before we close, I want to ask something special from you. If you've made it this far, comment the word "Father" below, so we know this story reached you, and so Thomas's story can keep traveling to hearts that need a little hope tonight. Thomas Ferrow never became a wealthy man. He never owned a new truck or a big house. But he became something far greater in his daughter's eyes, and in the eyes of an entire town that once overlooked him, proof that quiet sacrifice, given without condition, always finds its way home.